So this is in fact the last paragraph, and uh, it, well, we'll have a discussion, but I think we're going to find it pretty interesting. So let's say the bracha. Baruch atah
Ata
Adonai
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam,
asher
asher
kitsivanu
kishanu
mitzvotav
v'tzivtav,
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asot
l'ashot
b'divrei
b'nei
Torah.
Torah.
Amen. All right. So I will need a volunteer, and let's start at first the minister. Anybody available?
We're missing some people. I'll read.
Okay, you're on.
At first, the minister despaired over this unexpected obstacle, but then he remembered the whistle he had received from the third giant. He took it out of his pocket and blew on it, and in an instant, a wind blew into the room through the open window and said, "How can I be of help to you?" Then the minister told the wind about the spell and asked if it could carry them away from there with neither the feet of the princess nor his own touching the ground. "Of course I can do that," said the wind, "but where is it that you want to go?" And the minister told the wind to take them back to the palace of the king, who was the father of the princess. And the next thing they knew, they found themselves soaring through the heavens, and before long the wind set them down in the kingdom from which they had been gone for so long. So it was that the loyal minister at last succeeded in his quest, and when the king and the princess, who was no longer lost, were reunited, their sadness changed to a joy so great it cannot be described. May everyone know such a great joy at least once in a lifetime.
All right. So I love the last line especially because it is sort of oddly bittersweet. May everyone know such a great joy at least once in a lifetime. I mean, it may not be more than once in a lifetime. Uh, so there is a sort of special sense of the rarity of such an experience. Finding such a joy, that is to be reunited, the princess and the king, but the success of the minister in his quest may not happen all that often. It may happen just once. And even if it happens just once, that may be all that we can expect. It is, in fact, also one of the bittersweet elements of it is that we will be living, most of us, most of the time, in a different situation. We won't be living reunited with the king and the princess, and with a successful discharge of our quest. But in the process of trying to reestablish any one of those things, the implication of the last paragraph, and particularly the last line, is that for most of us, most of the time, we are searching. We are lost. We are separated from our home, and may or may not feel a reuniting reality again, or at least not for a long time. That's certainly a bittersweet realization. But let's look at that for a minute and analyze it a little more closely.
So, I wanted to say something that Mother Teresa claimed she was only 1 week of her life was she in communication with God. And it didn't even seem to matter, because there was the work that she had to do, and that's what drove her. So, but that would be the great joy, I would think.
Well, I think that that's an interesting, insight into our situation. That is to say that we are, most of us, most of the time, not in touch with or not in connection with those things that give us ultimate fulfillment. We are, most of us, most of the time, trying to return to that situation or reestablish it. So somehow,
Just one more thing.
yeah, please.
In Buddhism and meditation, we often talk about this word, the idea of a glimpse. And for a fraction of a second, you might have a glimpse. I had it the other day when I woke up from a nap and my body was absolutely still and silent. I couldn't even feel it. It was like weightless. But it's that idea of that was enough for a fraction of a second. And I'm sure all of us have had that, just a physical sensation, you know, or some kind of joy.
Well,
it doesn't have to be much.
It is a physical sensation, but it could be something that is not physical. I mean, the point is, when you talk about a glimpse, we see something, most of us at one time or another, but may not be very often, enough for us to think that there is some possibility which is enough to drive us forward and enough to keep us in the search or continuing to try to complete the mission. The story is about, among other things, it centers on the doggedness, the perseverance of the minister, who, despite what seems at one time or another to be overwhelming odds or the impossibility of the quest that he is on, he persists in his pursuit of whatever is going to be the final status.
Excuse me, Rabbi Baker.
Yes, please.
So it seems as though there's a possibility, and maybe this is a little bit snarky,
Okay.
that there are two reasons for reading things like this. Number one is to encourage us to be persistent. And the second is that when we read about someone getting a glimpse of this great joy, it helps us notice when it happens to us because it may be fleeting.
And I think a third thing is it gives us the idea that it's possible.
Yeah, it does give us that idea that it doesn't require very much necessarily for us to recognize the possibility. But where does the doggedness or the perseverance or the intensity of activity on the part of the minister, where does that come from? What is it? What is it that drives him forward? Okay, there is a glimpse. What is it that he gets in that glimpse? What is it?
Well, there's the idea of faith.
Okay.
It's really important, I think, here that somehow he has faith that if he persists, something will come. Like Michael, when he's working on a computer, has faith that somehow he'll be able to make it work.
And where does that faith come from? I mean, is it totally illogical, totally without any kind of explanation, or is there something somewhere that is a cause of that faith, or gives the faith enough of a reality that we're willing to pursue it, even though we may be lost for a long period of time, or we may be defeated by obstacles often in the course of our pursuit.
Well, he's had the experience.
Okay, what's the experience?
The experience is that before he's been persistent, and eventually he was able to solve all the problems to make the thing work. So he's got this belief that with persistence it will work.
Yeah, so having had a taste, that may be enough to say, well, okay, the reality that I'm looking for is not present now, but I know it exists somewhere, somehow, and therefore there must be some way to return to it. And that's what much of the story is about. At least the beginning part of the story especially, is the minister saying to people, I know this exists somewhere, and you may not think so, or you may point to this as evidence that it doesn't exist, but I know that it exists somewhere because I've had that taste. I've had that little glimpse, if you like. Maimonides talks about this as well in terms of looking through a lattice work in order to find what the Torah or the truth that is part of the Torah. You don't see it directly. You don't see it. The look, the vision doesn't last all that long. It's just a little taste.
And Moses doesn't get to see God, just little parts of him.
Yes, and he doesn't even get to see what?
The promise.
The promised land, yes.
Oh, that too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but he knows that it exists. God has told him, I guess.
So he gets a glimpse of it.
Some way he has an idea or a
Well, he stands up on a,
and that's enough.
doesn't he get to stand up on a mountain and have a glimpse of it? A true.
I think so, yeah.
That's it.
It's at the end.
That's at the very end.
Yeah.
He gets to see a little bit from afar. But during the whole of the years of the wandering, he has not actually seen it. What does he know about the promised land? What during the period of the journey through the wilderness?
It's the promised land, and it has milk and honey, and it is where we.
What does he know, and how does he know it?
I keep coming back to the word passion. You get a glimpse, and then you have a passion, and that's what makes it worth it to take such a long journey.
Yeah, but there's a very famous story that tells us what that glimpse is and where it comes from.
Well, isn't it the spies?
The spies, sure. They come back and they have a report. Moses and the rest of the Israelites have not seen what the spies have seen. And in fact, the spies, other than two of them, see something and don't really know exactly what it is that they've seen. But two of them do know something. And Moses takes their report seriously, and that's the glimpse. That's all that he knows.
Wow.
That's enough. There are, in Jewish law, there are certain rules of evidence. Okay, let's say, for example, somebody is accused of murder. What is required in order for them to be convicted of the crime of murder? They have to be what?
Well, there has to be some people there who tell him not to do it. A couple of people.
Yeah, there have to be two people.
Two people, yes.
And not only do they have to say what it is they saw, but they have to have warned the Moses or whoever it is not to go ahead and do what he's contemplating doing, so that in order that you can demonstrate that what he does or what the action that he takes is intentional and not some mistake. So the idea of there being a kind of set of minimum criteria that have to be fulfilled in order to say, I can rely on the word of that or the information that I'm receiving applies here as well. That's why there are two spies who return with the positive report. If it was just Joshua, who is the more important of them, it would not be enough. It's crucial that there's another spy who attests to the same thing. And what is the warning? When the two spies explain to Moses what it is that they have seen and attest to the fact that it's in alignment with what God has said, they are making him aware of what the situation is. And if he persists in the quest, he's doing so with that informed motivation. So the story of the spies is much more important than you might think. It is the grounding upon which the quest is based. And it's what makes the Moses and the Israelites' quest a reasonable thing to do.
I like the fact that just a couple of spies have the positive take.
Yes, well, I think that's a very important
So
point.
then it takes faith to believe that there's something there worth going for.
Well, but it's faith of a certain sort. And when we say faith, we often mean that a person or a group has a belief in something without evidence. But that's not the kind of faith that's being spoken of here. There has to be a certain minimum kind of evidence. We might make a distinction between faith which is without evidence and faith which is based on some experience which is credible.
Well, we have this expression, blind faith.
Right, but this is not blind faith. This is faith that is in a way clear-sighted. It depends upon a view and a memory. And those two qualities are what make the faith a reasonable thing to pursue.
So what's the memory in the spies?
Oh, it's Moses' memory. Moses has this experience with the spies. He has the information, and he recalls it. It is in his mind. It is in his this description of the spies. Secondhand though it may be to Moses, is what motivates and animates his quest. So there is a vision or an image that he has, which is part of his motivation. Now, what happens to that image is interesting because it seems to be that in many ways, Moses adds to it. He builds that image up in his own mind. But there is underneath everything a sense of there being a reality that is communicated to Moses. But let's think about it in a very almost prosaic sort of way. In human relations, we might have an experience where we get to know someone or something in a very intimate sort of way, and then that doesn't get repeated. You know, what keeps you in a relationship with your spouse when things are not going well? what keeps you in the relationship is, to a certain degree, the memory of there having been an occasion where things were the way they were supposed to be. And because of that, you may maintain the faith, if you like, that this could happen again. That little experience, that little interaction, which may not have been repeated for many years, nonetheless animates your sense of what the relationship is. You don't throw it out, you don't abandon it, and so forth, as long as you feel that this memory reflects a positive, a possible recurring experience. As long as that possibility exists and you think about it and you believe that it is not, it's still possible in the future, you're apt to continue the relationship. When you don't believe that's possible anymore, then the relationship really is kind of over. So what happens with Moses, and because they trust in Moses, the Israelites, is that this experience of these spies indicates the way in which it may, what they experience, what the two positive spies experience, might be true, and it might be something that they encounter in the future, even though at the moment it's not present. So, what is it, do you think, and there's a lot of possibilities here, what is it that the minister and the princes, for example, are experiencing in their dislocation from the palace of the king that they want to return to? What is it that they're looking for exactly?
Well, I didn't see this till you asked, but that the king is actually God returning.
Yeah,
Right.
what's the relation? What's the palace?
We've seen that before, where the word king is God.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when you talk about a palace, you think about kings, and there is a king that the Israelites are trying to, or the minister and the princess are trying to return to. It's God, yes, but where? What is the palace that God inhabits?
Heaven. It's heaven.
Heaven is one possibility. There is a domain that is a divine domain. So yes, that is one possibility. But I think there's something even a little bit more, more immediate than heaven. Heaven is, how should I put it? It seems to me to connote a tremendous finality and distance. Mm-hmm. But the experience that the minister goes through is a quest that is a quest of this world, A, and B, where activities or events happen repeatedly. It's not as if the minister is going to remain in the palace of the king necessarily, having once found his way there.
Are you thinking maybe of Shabbat?
Maybe. Shabbat.
How about
would Shabbat be a good possibility, Michael?
Well, it's a time that, it's a place not in physical space, but in, I don't know if the word emotional quite applies here, but it's because it's more than even that. But it's a place where, or a time of great joy and relaxation, and
Mhm.
everything is right.
It,
It's a time of appreciation
mhm.
of everything that's there.
Appreciation of what do you think? I mean, a lot of possibilities. What
Well,
comes to mind?
not to, it's going along with that, but it's the great joy, great joy of connection that happens also on Shabbat.
Connection between what and what?
Well, thinking of the king as God, it would be the person and God, but it would also be the connection between two people.
Could be the connection between two people. It could be the connection between God and some partner. Uh, who might that partner be?
The Shekhinah.
Yes, that's one way in Jewish mysticism how that is described. The
Right.
Shekhinah is the presence of God.
Mhm.
To say that God and God's presence are reunited, which is an interesting sort of thought about what experience is. So there are ways in which maybe God exists, but we don't necessarily feel God's presence.
Yes.
And that'd be one way to look at it. What else could it possibly be? What else could be the partner or the analog that is reunited or reintegrated with God?
Well, I mean, each person.
Sure. How so, Michael?
Um, the um, there's a kind of acceptance and acknowledgement
Uh-huh.
that God is not something distant, but God is present right here. And I have not recognized that aspect of it.
That's very good.
And I have not recognized the part of me that is also God, since God is everything.
Excellent. And that's exactly where it seems to me that this all leads. And we can look at a couple of examples from Torah which say as much.
Yeah.
For example, there's this story of Jacob who winds up sleeping with his head on a stone and has a dream of the angels going up and down the ladder. Of course, a good description of the possibility of connection. And what does he say when he wakes up?
God was here and I did not recognize it.
Exactly. God was in this place, but I did not know it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is a very good example of exactly what we're talking about. That in various experiences in our lives, with places, with things, with people, and so on, we may not realize that God is there, although God is there all the time. We encounter every once in a while such an experience, and something happens. In the case of Jacob, it's a dream, but it could be something else, which makes us aware of this dimension, which was there all along, but which we were not sensible to. There are other examples. For example, I love this one. We read this on the high holidays every year. And it is one of the most powerful parts of the high holiday experience for me each year that we do this. We read the passage from the Torah in which Moses says, God is how does it go exactly? Um, the Torah is not something far away that we have to send somebody over the sea to get it and to bring it to us. It's not a number of different places which require us to have it brought to us. It's not lost to us. It's not distant from us. Where is it, in fact, according to Moses' words? It is in our hearts and in our minds that we already know it, which is, I think, an important statement along the lines we were just discussing. That is to say, this is the God and God's connection to us is there, even though we may not recognize it, even though we may have once had that experience, but we may have become disconnected from it. And so we are always going out into the world searching for something that we already have within us. But we have, for a variety of reasons that are understandable given the nature of our daily lives, we have forgotten that it's there. Whether it's the love of another person or the motivation and the meaning that's part of an idea or a value or whatever it may be that is with us, although we lose sight of it. It's the losing sight of it that this story is about. It is the word glimpse that Kim gave us is a very good example of this. There is a glimpse, and when you have such a thing, it is hard, such an experience, it's hard to keep it clear what exactly did it look like. You know, this is a very good way of talking about what Buber calls the I-thou relationship. When Buber talks about the I-it and the I-thou, he's talking about two different epistemological modalities. The I-thou is not, it's as much about knowledge, it's about as much about what we know as the I-it, but it is in a different realm, we might say. What makes the I-thou experience different from the I-it, even though it's something that we may say, we know, we have this strong feeling or strong awareness of something being true. But when we're asked about it, can we describe it? Well, not so much. Any attempt to describe it distorts the image or the vision that is animating us. If you there's a genre of song. It's often about a woman singing about a man, but it can sometimes be the other way around. I think of the example of the song from Showboat. He's just my Bill, an ordinary guy, nothing to remark upon. You know, his style and grace or whatever it is. You know, he doesn't have any qualities that I can point to and say, that's why I love him. That's who he is. But despite that, it doesn't matter. Something was seen, something was internalized, even though trying to describe it subsequently is fruitless. Okay, this is.
Your lunch is here.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I'll be right back. I apologize.
I'm gonna let my cat out while he does that. Come here, cat.
Sure.
Come here. Bernie, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, I'm back.
Back in the saddle.
Yes. Is the cat taken care of?
Yes, the cat is taking care of. Thank you.
Okay, good. The question of what kind of knowledge is it? What is it that we know when we know something in this I thou modality? What is different about that kind of knowing as opposed to the I it way of knowing? There's a, when we know something in the normal sort of I it sort of way, we know something not as a whole, but as its part, in its parts. It's analytical. We know the elements that make it up, but we can't and we don't experience it in a holistic sort of way. The difference between I it and I thou is that in the I thou modality, we know something as a whole. But when you try to describe something, what happens? What happens is you have to take it apart. If you speak about a relationship, let's say, and you say this, what is it that is meaningful about the relationship? You have to point to this quality or that quality or this element or that element, and when you do, you have disassembled it.
Is it the difference between loving and liking?
Well, that may be one way of talking about it. You know, I mean, there is this question of, I guess about loving and liking, what I would say is that loving is this kind of holistic way of knowing something or experiencing something, but you can't, when we try to understand it, we're already out of the holistic ballpark. Okay.
There's an analogy. It's not perfect, but it has to do with how many hours you have to do something before you are a master of it. And the
okay.
I thou has a quality of mastery in the way in which you relate and deal with it. Before that, you have to think about it. Oh, do I do this? You know, do I kiss her on the cheek first or kiss her on the lips? And those things become not an issue when it's the I thou. That is, things are sort of spontaneously lived and lived correctly.
There's an element of integration, I think, in the I thou that we don't experience in the I it. You know, years ago when I was in high school, I was a tennis player, and I used to have to think about how what were the steps in hitting a proper forehand or backhand or whatever it was. Well, I had to make sure that I moved away from the ball. I had to be sure. There was a number of different criteria. And at the beginning of trying to master the stroke, I had to think about each one of those things. And if I didn't think about them fast enough, there was something, you know, the shot went awry in some way. Ultimately, as Michael is indicating, you know, with something, in that case, as simple as hitting a forehand, you learn how to do it all as one thing, and you don't have to remember each individual part of it. And that's when you say you've mastered the stroke. But even then, what's the problem? Even though once I've had that experience of having done that, that doesn't mean that it's automatic for me to be able to do it the next time and the next time and the next time.
Right.
There are many different ways in which that the memory of what it's like to hit a forehand properly is in my mind, but that doesn't mean that I can do it every time.
Right.
Or that it's available every time. Maybe the ball is in a different position. Maybe my racket is in who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of imponderables. I remember what it's like because I once hit a proper forehand. I know what it feels like. I know what happens when I do that, but it doesn't necessarily happen every time. It may not even be available to me. So if it's something, even if that's true with something as relatively simple and small as hitting a forehand in tennis, how much more so is that the case in dealing with our complicated relationships with other human beings, with our histories, with our communities, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes an almost imponderable thing to think, what has to happen? What kind of luck or happenstance does there have to be for all of these different variables to fall into place at the right time, in the right way, in the right relationship to each other? How much of that is something that we can insist upon and plan for? How much of it is something that happens despite or without connection to our planning or our desire or our intention? You cannot say, okay, I am now going to have an ideal relationship. You can't just decide you're going to do it. So the idea that we're going to somehow reestablish or return to the connection we have had at some time in our lives with God, this is almost, it seems like an almost impossible situation. And because of that, it is rare, it is surprising when it happens, and it doesn't necessarily, it is repeatable, but not repeatable because we've decided to repeat it, only because we put ourselves in the position of, as it were, having to hit the forehand. You stop playing tennis, the feeling of hitting the stroke properly cannot recur. If you're playing the game, well, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but you have to be involved in the activity. So in the context of our relationship with God, you have to be involved in the activity of trying to connect with God. What does that mean? Well, this is where the qualities of the midot, or the various characteristics that we are asked to try to develop, to understand in Mussar, are related to personal development and growth. That's where these come in. We are constantly trying, or we ideally should be constantly trying to repeat the stroke, okay? But that doesn't mean that we're able to work with all of them at once. That is so difficult to even imagine, even contemplate. So the idea of discipline, of trying to establish a set of conditions in which we are reintegrated with God. This is a monumental task of a lifetime. And it's why, from the standpoint of Mussar, we are constantly looking at our behavior and constantly trying to understand it and constantly trying to evaluate it. And that when we look at one particular quality or aspect of it, we know at the same time that there are 11 other possibilities that we're not looking at because we can't see them all at the same time. So we do it with other people. And in the discipline of Mussar, and as the discipline of Torah study is with other people. You know, you can study Torah on your own. You can study your own behavior, but it's with other people who are part of the process of studying you that things emerge that would not otherwise, and you see something that you didn't see before.
Mm-hmm.
It's the experience of Jacob having the dream, and the dream is what, that vision or that image is what causes him to look at things in a different way. That's what happens to us if we're lucky. And there are things we can do that sort of predispose us to that kind of activity or incline us to that kind of activity. But even then, it doesn't mean that they are absolutely going to happen or that we can manage the process. The whole point is that we see things that we didn't know were there. We thought might have been there. We might have had some glimpse or some memory of them having been there. But in the moment, we have forgotten that they are there. Now, when we look at our own behavior, it's hard to imagine it, but we're not often necessarily aware of what it is that our behavior exemplifies.
Did you want to talk about the next book? I have to go exactly at 10:59.
Oh, okay, sure.
I mean 12:59.
Well, there are a number of possibilities here, and thank you for reminding me, Kim. One thing that occurs to me is that we might want to pick another story of Nahum's. I mean, he has many stories, and there are many of them that are worthwhile looking at in very careful ways. So that's a possibility. Another possibility is we could connect with one of the texts of Mussar itself. There are, Judith has referred to them, texts and materials that people quite regularly study and discuss and so forth that are part of the normal Mussar discipline. We could pick one of them. And maybe there's something you guys have in mind that would make sense in terms of personal growth kinds of things. I mean, there are many kinds of stories or many kinds of texts which have to do with this general area of understanding, which are not necessarily, from Nachum of Bratslav. There are other possibilities. What are people interested in?
All of it. I'm interested in all of it, so I'll go along with whatever it is.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you are. Does anybody else have any particular ideas they want to throw into the hopper?
I would kind of be interested in a story that maybe shows a well-rounded character, though at the same time I think any well-rounded character is flawed. So I mean, it would kind of be interesting to discover that, because I definitely enjoyed that part of this story where it's he's seeking her, but he is, to me, still deeply flawed. And
yes.
And so I thought that was kind of interesting, and it allowed me to kind of introspectively look at myself and kind of characters.
I see. Do you
thought
have
of the minister
story in mind?
I don't. I'm sorry. I don't have a particular
All right.
story. I
Just
felt
thought
like this
that it
was
had something.
an interesting
uh,
format for me.
Okay. All right. I think I have an idea of what elements of this story you'd like to connect with. Kim, did you want to add something?
No, I just was wondering, if, was it the minister you thought was flawed?
I know you're about to have to jump off. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of, I'd love to continue discussing this story a little bit longer, but ultimately, she was kicked out of her father's house for being evil. So he's devoted his whole life to essentially saving this girl who her father kind of got in an argument with her and said, "Get out of my house, you evil one." And so there's this question of, well, is she innocent? Is she a good person? What all is going on here? And I feel like you could almost get into a trolley car of, he spent so much time to save one person.
Okay, well, that's a reasonable question to ask. You know, there is a story that's rather well known in Midrash, but also in Jewish folk literature. It's called the Pardes, and it's about four Jewish scholars who enter into God's domain, essentially. And the story is about what happens to the four of them. Only one reemerges in whole. The other three have a disastrous experience. But it's the question of entering into this realm of meaning is what the story is all about. You know, it's kind of what we are.
I gotta go, but
Yeah.
Michael is host, so Michael can end the meeting.
All right. Okay. All
But
right.
whatever
take
you
care.
decide, I'm good with.
Okay.